Thank you for that really long and overly generous introduction. I'm going to depart from my prepared remarks to give you all a practice tip, which I got many years ago, which is if you're making an oral argument to the court and you seem to be ahead, it's probably time to sit down. And if I was going to take my own advice, I'd be sitting down and we'd be moving on. But I will not follow that advice today. Dean Faulkner, board and faculty members, friends and family members, and of course, most importantly, members of the 2023 graduating class of the Appalachian School of Law, congratulations. I hope this is a day that will be a lifetime, a joyous lifetime memory for all of you, and I believe it will be. And I thank you for inviting me to share in that joy. Today, we really celebrate not just this moment, but three periods. First, we do celebrate this moment, this wonderful occasion honoring your completion of law school. But we also celebrate a second period. That is the last several years. We look back and celebrate your hard work over several years, gaining new experiences, knowledge, and skills, your long hours, your juggling of multiple responsibilities, the birth of children, new friendships, and all of that, of course, occurring during a horrible pandemic. And third, we celebrate the opportunities you have going forward to make a meaningful difference in the lives of your communities and your neighbors. And my aim in the next few minutes is to focus on those opportunities and really the opportunities to help our country better keep its promise of equal justice for all. In speaking of this, I do not mean to cast a pall on what is a joyous and happy occasion, but to cast a call for you who are on the cusp of joining the legal profession to put your growing experiences, skills, and knowledge to the service of your communities and your neighbors, to help increase their access to lawyers for their civil legal needs. Too few Americans are aware that the right to a lawyer applies only to some criminal cases, but not to civil legal matters. Now, this great law school is committed to providing students with skills and knowledge you need to succeed in a variety of legal careers, including serving the needs of communities like those in Central Appalachia. ASL's mission thus closely aligns with the mission of Legal Services Corporation, for whom I work. As Dean Faulkner said, LSC is the largest funder of civil legal aid in America. We are governed by a bipartisan board that is named by the President of the United States and confirmed by the Senate. We fund 132 legal aid programs operating over 900 offices across the country in every state, territory, and the District of Columbia, and those programs include Southwest Virginia Legal Aid Society in this area. The legal aid programs we fund provide a wide range of services, but they generally focus on shelter, subsistence, health, and safety. In 2022, housing and family cases consisted of over 2/3 of the cases handled by our grantees. And the pandemic has caused evictions to surge, especially following the expiration of eviction moratoria and the dwindling of emergency rental assistance. Legal aid providers serve single moms, children, seniors, veterans, and survivors of domestic violence, natural disasters, and opioid use disorder. And they serve individuals and families in every corner of the United States, urban areas, rural areas, suburban areas. Now, the numbers I just quoted reflect people who legal aid providers are able to serve. The challenge I am focusing on today are the far greater numbers of people who we are unable to serve. In America, when it comes to justice, we begin with appropriately high aspirations. The first sentence of our Constitution, in the preamble, identifies the establishment of justice as a priority. Indeed, justice is identified in our Constitution even before ensuring domestic tranquility and before providing for the common defense. And the phrase equal justice under law is engraved upon the front entrance of the United States Supreme Court building. But sadly, in practice, we fall well short of equal justice under law. Every tenant in America is entitled to certain rights under the laws of the jurisdiction in which they reside. Every person in America is, by law, entitled to be free from domestic violence. And all our veterans are entitled by law to certain veterans' benefits by dint of their service to their country. But when it comes to access to or enforcement of these and countless other civil rights, we are not equal. Our judicial and administrative systems for enforcing these rights were largely built by lawyers on the assumption that people using the systems will have lawyers available to them. In many cases of life-altering matters, that assumption of the availability of a lawyer is false. For example, in eviction cases, in many jurisdictions, over 90% of tenants are unrepresented, while over 90% of landlords are represented. Overall, the legal aid providers that LSC funds turn away, for lack of resources, about 50% of the eligible clients who show up at their door. They turn away 50%. And that 50% number doesn't include the people who don't recognize that they're facing a legal problem or who don't know of the existence of legal aid. And that 50% number doesn't include the people who are close to, but not quite poor enough to qualify for civil legal aid, but still can't afford a lawyer to help them with their civil legal problems. LSC's 2022 Justice Gap Study, which was released just a year ago, showed that only 8% of the civil legal problems confronted by low-income Americans receive adequate legal assistance. 92% of the problems faced by low-income Americans receive no assistance or inadequate assistance. Now, you might wonder, does getting legal assistance really make a difference? Well, I'll tell you, in a system designed on the premise that people will have lawyers, not having a lawyer is often dispositive. In many landlord-tenant courts across the nation, unrepresented tenants lose over 90% of their cases. They prevail less than 10% of the time. By contrast, for example, when Cleveland established a right to counsel law in 2020 at the outset of the pandemic, 93% of the represented tenants were able to remain in their homes. So quite a big difference. Now, given the gap between the civil legal needs of people living in poverty and the resources available to meet those needs, you might reasonably ask, how much is America investing in civil legal aid? In the current fiscal year, 2023, Congress has appropriated $560 million to civil legal aid through LSC. Now, we know from the Justice Gap statistics I just cited, 92% not served, that we haven't invested enough. The investment's not sufficient. Let me give you a couple other benchmarks by which to measure our investment. 3 decades ago, in 1994, our appropriation, LSC's appropriation, was $400 million. So 3 decades later, that number has only inched up by $160 million, not nearly enough to cover inflation, not nearly enough to cover the various recessions that have occurred, the pandemic, or the growth in the poverty population. During the pandemic, LSC estimated that to represent all the eligible households at risk for eviction would cost about $2.5 billion. That's B, billion with a B. And that was just for one category of cases evictions. Congress currently appropriates as much money for civil legal aid as Americans spend on Halloween costumes for their pets, So clearly, given these figures, and given my role as president of LSC, I will tell you we need to devote more resources to civil legal aid. But to be honest, the dimensions of the justice gap demonstrate that adding more legal aid resources alone will not fix the problem. And that's where we need your help. We need to make at least 3 fundamental changes. First, we need to close the knowledge gap about the unequal justice in America. Second, we need to fundamentally change the way our civil legal dispute resolution system is structured in certain respects and operates. And third, we need to increase and make more effective and efficient the civil legal aid assistance available to all Americans. Now, to close the justice gap, that is the knowledge gap about America's justice gap, we need to illuminate far more broadly the problem of unequal justice about which I've been speaking. We need more public messengers. That's why it's so important for you, our next generation of lawyers, to also be our next generation of leaders, to help ensure that your neighbors and your elected representatives understand the importance of civil legal issues and the critical role legal aid providers play in helping people across America address those issues. And I ask you to help change the way our civil legal dispute resolution system is structured and operates so that we can move more close to the ideal of equal justice under law. For example, Alaska, Arizona, Minnesota, Utah, and Oregon have all recently authorized, trained, and properly supervised paralegals to provide legal services in specified categories of cases in which there are demonstrably a shortage of legal assistance. And I would say in the face of an enormous justice gap, we should be guided by data from these jurisdictions as to determine the success of these new programs. Lastly, regarding making civil legal aid more effective, we need to leverage the relatively few and grossly inadequate existing supply of legal aid resources with additional resources and technology tools that will effectively increase the supply of legal assistance and make that assistance available wherever people needing the assistance are located. We need technology tools to facilitate the resolution of individual civil cases and to disperse effective legal assistance widely across the country to legal deserts in sparsely populated rural areas and urban areas where legal aid resources are sorely inadequate. In that regard, I note that the ratio of lawyers to Central Appalachian residents, which is approximately 1 to 742, is dramatically lower than the average in Virginia at large, which is about 1 to 294. I hope many of you graduating today will consider working in legal services in Appalachia and beyond. And I urge all of you, whether you hang out your own shingle, work in a law firm, work in the government, or work in-house at a corporation, to identify organizations in your communities who provide legal services to your neighbors and who could use pro bono volunteers in their work. Become their champions. Become their leaders. Help us keep our promise of equal justice under law. I submit the stakes couldn't be higher, and I'm very grateful for your help. And again, congratulations.